Hello everyone, today we will be covering the essentials of a contract. According to the Indian Contract Act, an agreement enforceable by law is a contract. However, according to section 10 of the same act, for an agreement to be valid, it must be entered with the free consent of the parties competent to contract for a lawful consideration, a lawful object, and it must not be expressly declared to be void. Let's look at each of these elements in detail. Consent is defined as when two or more persons agree on the same thing in the same sense. This is also called consensus ad idem, that is meeting of minds. For example, if A and B agree to purchase a horse and A thinks that a toy horse is being sold, whereas B thinks that a real horse is being sold, then there is no meeting of mind and this will not be a valid consent. There is also a principle of non est factum, which allows a person to void a contract if they signed it believing it to be completely different than what it is. But for a consent to be valid, it must be free consent. Section 14 lays down that a consent is free only when it is not marred by fraud, misrepresentation, mistake, undue influence or coercion. Let's discuss each of these in detail. First, coercion. Any contract entered through consent by coercion is void. In Indian law, coercion can include threats to property and also threats by other party. However, in English law, duress, which is an alternative of coercion, also includes threats to life and property but does not include threats by third parties. However, there are certain other differences between duress and coercion. Coercion includes threats to life or bodily harm. However, coercion includes threats to goods or property as well. Duress should proceed from a party to the contract, whereas coercion can also proceed from third parties. Duress should be directed against the party or a near relative, whereas coercion can proceed against anybody else. Let's look at some of the examples. For example, if A enters into a contract at the threat of bodily harm, it will be voidable at the instance of A. Another example is when A threatens B to sell his house or else A will burn his property. This selling of the property will be marred by coercion and will therefore be voidable at the end of B. There is a very famous case of Chikman Amiraju where a person threatened to commit suicide if his relatives did not sell him the property. The court ruled the contract to be marred by coercion and therefore voidable at the instance of the relatives. Let's look at one of the other elements for a valid and free consent. That is undue influence. Undue influence occurs when a person is in a position to dominate the will of the other and the person uses that position to enter into an agreement or a contract. The person here tries to gain an unfair and undue advantage from the other person by entering into the contract. Such a thing usually happens in fiduciary relationships where there is a lot of trust and confidence between the parties. Some examples of fiduciary relationships are between a teacher and a student, a doctor and a patient, a parent and a child. The fiduciary relationships are based on the concept of oberima fides, which means of utmost good faith. Some of the examples of using undue influence could include a doctor pressuring a patient to deliver a property to him, or a spiritual pressuring a devotee to enter into some sort of a contract with him. Let's look at two fact situations. In the Chinnamma case, a trustee used undue influence to obtain donations, whereas in another situation, a moneylender lends interest to parties at a very high interest rate. However, the interest rates in the market were generally high at the time. In these scenarios, in the former case, there will be an exercise of undue influence while taking donations. However, in the latter scenario, there will be no exercise of undue influence. Let's look at another element, that is fraud under section 17 of the Contract Act. Fraud includes deliberate misrepresentation or a tendency to deception in entering the contracts. Fraud can include false promises, deliberate misinformation, or a sense that right information is being given, however, with the awareness that there is wrong information being transpired. Thus, the essential element of a fraud is that there should be false statement with a deliberate intention of misinformation. Ordinarily, passive concealment or mere concealment of a fact or information is not fraud, as the other party is not obliged to reveal each and every information to the other party. Let's look at some of the examples of fraud. For example, if A shows B fake letters of offers for the property in order to show high demand, that will be fraud. Secondly, if A shows fake ownership letters of the property, again that will be fraud. However, there are certain exceptions to silence amounting to fraud or not. And one of these exceptions is principle of caveat emptor or buyer be aware. This happens when there is a duty to speak, for example, in fiduciary relationships, or it happens when there is certain conditions put up by the buyer. Let's look at another element which is closely similar to fraud, however substantially different at the same time. This is the concept of misrepresentation under Section 18 of the Indian Contract Act. Misrepresentation occurs when there is transfer of some information which the person transferring the information believes to be true. However, the information turns out to be untrue. This makes the contract voidable at the instance of the other party who is being misinformed of the fact or situation. A contract marred by misrepresentation is voidable only if the person entering the contract entered because of the information supplied through misrepresentation. Although misrepresentation and fraud sound very similar, the very difference in both of these concepts is in fraud, the person is aware that the information being supplied is deceptive and wrong, whereas in misrepresentation, the person believes the information to be absolutely correct. For example, if the landlord firmly believes that the property he is supplying contains a garage, however, there is no garage at the property and the landlord was not aware of the same. Thus, this becomes a situation marred by misrepresentation and the buyer can use this to make the contract void. This is exactly what happened in the case of Allah Bakhsh Khan, where the landlord supplied an information to the lessee conveying that the house has 4 bedrooms. However, the landlord was not aware that one of the bedrooms was not functional and only came to know of this after the contract was entered into. Thus, here the lessee had the option to make the contract void due to misrepresentation. The last element marring free consent is mistake. A mistake could be of 2 types, a bilateral mistake or a unilateral mistake. So, a bilateral mistake is when both the parties to the contract are mistaken about an essential fact, thus making the contract void, not voidable. Mistake may operate on a contract in 2 ways. Firstly, it can defeat the consent to the contract, and secondly, it may defeat the purpose for which the parties were entering into the contract. One example of a bilateral mistake could be 2 parties entering into a contract for sale of goods without being aware of the fact that goods are already destroyed during shipment. Such a contract would be void since there is no good to be contracted into. A unilateral mistake is a unique scenario where only one party is mistaken as to the purpose or some other essential element of the contract. However, such a contract will be valid. But such a contract could also be invalid provided the other party was aware of the fact that the other party is mistaken and uses that to their advantage. The other part of mistake is mistake of law. Mistake of law happens when one of the parties is either unaware of the law or is aware but chooses to ignore the law. Such a contract will always be valid. This means that neither party can simply claim that they were not aware of the law. However, this is valid only for Indian law. So, foreign jurisdiction based law will be treated as a mistake of fact and will be treated that way only. Now that we are done with consent and elements of consent, let's look at another element that is very essential for a contract to be valid, and that is competence of the parties. Competence of the parties refers to the fact that both parties entering into the contract are capable of understanding the contract and implementing it. Parties are competent to the contract if they are of sound mind, have attained the age of majority and are not disqualified by law. So let's look at each of these elements in detail. Element 1 is that a person must be of sound mind. This means that a person must be capable of understanding the contract, its terms and the consequences of it. A contract with a person of unsound mind is void. Section 12 of the Indian Contract Act defines a person of a sound mind as a person who is capable of understanding the contract and its terms and is also capable of forming a rational judgment of the contract. Any person who is unable to do this at the time of entering into a contract will enter into a contract that is absolutely void. The second component is having reached the age of majority. The age of majority in India is 18 years of age. Minors can enforce contracts that they enter into for a valuable consideration, because even though they cannot incur liability, they are also not debarred from acquiring title to anything that is beneficial to them. Legal guardians of minors can enter into contracts for them. One of the essential components to be looked into during this stage is Section 68 of the Indian Contract Act. According to Section 68 of the Indian Contract Act, if a person supplies necessities to a person of unsound mind or a minor, that person who is supplying the necessities is entitled to be reimbursed later on from either property or through other means. Please note that necessity is a relative fact and is to be determined on a case-to-case basis. Now, let's look at a situation. A minor, executed a mortgage in favor of B, a moneylender. Before the mortgage was executed, a notice was issued to B on behalf of A's mother, intimating B of A's minority. Despite this notice, B got A to sign a declaration stating that A was an adult and then advanced part of the money to A and executed the mortgage deed. A filed for cancellation of the mortgage deed. B contended that A was an adult, B, that A was stopped from pleading minority because of the declaration, C, that if A were a minor, the contract is voidable and not void, and lastly D, if the court cancelled the mortgage deed, it should order repayment of monies advanced. The court held that a contract made with a minor was void and that the moneylender was not entitled to repayment of the monies advanced. Now, let's look at another illustration. A, an infant and a professional boxer, applied for and was granted a license from the Board of Control. The license provided that A would have to adhere strictly to the rules of the board and to any further rules or alterations to the rules. The board withheld a purse of £3,000 from A in accordance with its rules on the ground that A had been disqualified in a contest for hitting below the belt. It was held that the contract was binding against A, even though A was a minor, because the license was practically essential in order to enable A to become proficient in A's profession. Lastly, there are persons who are disqualified by law to enter into a valid contract. These could be persons of unsound mind as well as persons, say, who are declared insolvent by the court or the government. In some situations, some persons are essentially barred from entering into contracts given their specific laws or specific jurisdiction. In such cases, if the person goes ahead and enters into a contract, that contract will be void. For example, corporations derive their value from charters, statutes or acts. If such a corporation enters into a contract that goes beyond the scope allowed by the charter or statute, such a contract would be void and null. These are the first two elements of a valid contract. In the next video, we'll be covering the other elements of a valid contract.